everyone. I think we're here. I will call us to order. This is the special budget workshop led by David Cook and Christiane. Hi, Charlie, looking good in your tie. Look at that. I will turn it over. I think, David, you want me to just go straight to Christiane, who's at the mic? Does that work? Good morning, Christiane. How are you?
Good morning. Good. How are you? Thanks for joining us this morning. Okay, so welcome, third budget work session. Today we're going to talk about preliminary property tax scenarios. This is an early preview based on April estimates, and you won't have to hear from me for the first time. I'm going to delegate some of my work finally. That's good. I'm going to let you hear from Brady Kirk and David together as a dynamic duo. So for those of you, you've heard from Brady once before, but Brady Kirk's one of our budget managers in the Fort Worth lab, and he focuses kind of in a new role where he's pivoted to revenue. So property tax, sales tax, and some of our other major revenue sources. And so what you'll see today is mostly his work. So we're going to let him take the lead, and then David will help facilitate conversation as well. So I think this will be good conversation, healthy conversation at this time in the budget season. So I'll kick it over to Brady and David this morning.
Let's give it up for Brady. Let me make just some introductory comments too. You guys look different from over here. I think it's the first time I've stood at this podium.
It's because Jared's wearing a suit today.
And Jared's wearing a suit.
And you're bald, yeah. And I know.
So this is intended, as Christiane said, to be conversational. So we're going to share information in real time and explain that this is very draft information at this time, and we want to share with you all the assumptions that are behind it, because as assumptions are made, as we move forward into the future, as reality happens, these numbers, if there's one thing I'm going to guarantee you, these numbers are going to be different by the time we talk about the budget. But I think this will be helpful in describing what happens between April and July or August when we present a budget, what's happening with appraised values and how that impacts our conversation around the tax rate. So we have made a bunch of assumptions at this point in time, and I think my job is, as Brady's going through the presentation, I say, hold on, Brady, let's stop right there and make sure we're clear on some of the assumptions that are involved in the presentation. But we want it to be very conversational. As you have questions along the way, please feel free to stop us as we go from there. All right, Brady, take it over.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you all for being here for the budget work session today. And like David said, we just got these numbers last week, so they're very preliminary, but we're excited to share it with you. This is such a big part of the budget process and giving us an idea of what we might be able to fund in a future year. And it's so exciting that I might run away with it, so I'm glad I've got David as a tempering influence up here. So before we even put a single number on the page, I just want to reinforce what David said, that where we are in the process is that we only have the very earliest look at what property values might be. So in April, on April 30th, all of the appraisal districts send their estimated values to the city and all the taxing entities. Then between April and July, there's all kinds of ways that things can change, and we call that erosion. The biggest way, obviously, is that people protest those values, but there could be properties coming on and off the roll, properties could get new exemptions, so those numbers can be really different by the time that July 25th comes around. And with Tarrant County, the Tarrant Appraisal District in particular, they've extended the deadline to protest your property evaluation. It's not a huge extension, only goes until May 24th, but that's another variable within all of this. And throughout the presentation, I know you've all heard about the no new revenue rate and the voter approval rate, and I just want to say at the start that where those come from, it's all really defined by the state of Texas in a program and a concept called Truth in Taxation. And so that really mandates a lot of what we have to report, certain disclosures that puts bounds on what the property tax rate can be. And even though it's not always stated explicitly, a big assumption within Truth in Taxation is that if your property value has increased, even if the rate's the same, they say that the governing entity increased your taxes. So that's a big concept within truth in taxation.
Brady, before we do this, I forgot to recognize that we had appraisal district expertise at the council table. Okay.
That's right. So I'm going to be careful what I say because I might be checked by one of the council members. So rolling into those numbers that we got from the appraisal districts, last year, forget about the market value, even the appraised value, what we care about is the net taxable value, and last year that was about $116 billion. As David said, these are only the April estimates. You should expect some erosion before we get to July, but right now what's been reported to us is almost $130 billion. So a lot of that, the majority, about three-quarters, more than three-quarters, is from the change in taxable value. So throughout the presentation, you might hear us refer to that as existing growth. And that's good. We're always happy to have existing growth, and that says good things about our city and our economy. But the number that's really key here, or at least I would say more key in all of this in our revenue discussions, is new construction. So properties that have come onto the roll that were not there last year. So if we break down by county, that $130 billion, this is what it looks like. Now, you probably all know that the vast majority of our property is in Tarrant County, and that's not changing. It probably won't change as long as any of our careers last, but where we're seeing a lot of our growth is in Denton and in Parker. So 10% growth in Tarrant County is really still pretty good, but look at how much Denton has exploded, and especially on the new construction side, there's major growth there, and proportionally really a lot of new construction growth in Parker as well. Now in Wise,
Oh, go ahead. Do Wise.
in Wise County, all of our counties are special to us. They're all meaningful, but Wise is not very large within where the city of Fort Worth has its city limits. So I looked at last year's rolls, and there were 80 properties in Wise, and 70 of those were mineral properties. And no one likes to see 62.5% decrease in value, but that's mostly just a decrease in mineral values. So a lot of that has just been taken out of the land.
I was just going to emphasize, so thinking about new development, new construction, almost a third of it came from Denton County. So when we think about the growth of the city and where new values are coming from, almost a third of that, you say a third of it is outside of Tarrant County.
And that's not an aberration either. Last year, it wasn't $1 billion in Denton, but it was within close range of this value. So I think that's likely to continue. So here's a look at just year over year. We talk about the growth, 12% overall this year, almost 3% new construction. And this is how it's stacked up against some previous years. So existing growth really is stronger than we might have thought it had been a few months ago. Some of the news stories we heard and some of the initial estimates we saw just almost by word of mouth coming out of the appraisal districts. The 9.3% for that is pretty good. But we would have hoped to have seen a little bit more than 2.7% in new construction. So this is going back to at least the last 6 years. This is the lowest we have seen. Last year we were 3.25%, and at this time of the year last year we were 3.9%. So we've got a big decrease in the rate of new construction, and this particular combination where we've got high existing growth and lower new construction, that can be kind of a challenging combination further on when we start to talk about some of those truth and taxation rates. So we've talked about erosion. It's a big part of this discussion. From here on out, we probably won't say too much more about it because we're going to settle on one scenario. But if we just look at last year, what happened with erosion, it was pretty significant. It was above average. We lost about 4.5% of the total value that we got in April by the time that we made it to July 25th. And that includes a loss in new construction. And that can happen even in new construction. You wouldn't expect a lot of that to come off the roll. In rare instances, we've actually seen new construction increase between April and July, but I wouldn't bank on that. And this is 4.5% erosion that we got last year.
Brady, do we have, I mean, is there kind of like any historical trend on the percentage of decrease?
There is, so we're using a historical average, and that's how we've modeled it throughout the rest of the presentation, of 3%, and it's exactly 3%. I think the worst we've ever seen was almost 7, but what's pretty typical, maybe the median would only be 2.5. So just continuing on that exact same line of thought, what we're modeling when we look at possible rates and revenue scenarios for FY25, we're considering about 3% erosion, which is the average since 2018. So that's a 7-year average. And that would take us down from 129 billion to a little bit less than 126 billion. And we haven't modeled too much decrease in the new construction, but that is variable, both on the upward and downward end.
So just to emphasize, so we have an April number, that's the 129 billion. For the sake of this conversation today, we're just making a set of assumptions based on a 7-year average, and we need to do that so we can have the conversation around property tax rate scenarios. What I am going to guarantee you is that number will be different by the time we get to July, so, unless we are just that good. And the 7-year average is right on. But we need to make an assumptions of what the assessed value we think will be in July so we can have the conversation around tax rates.
That's it exactly. We have to at least place the assumptions somewhere. And between now and July, the appraisal districts by law don't have to tell us anything, but sometimes we can get a little bit of a look into how those are evolving. The general trend is there's a big decrease in the next month or two, and then some of that rebounds as protests are settled in July.
Brady, I heard we had an inside run at Tarrant County Appraisal District. So
I've heard. I don't know. I've heard the rumors, but anything helps. So now moving into a little bit more substantive conversation about the rate itself, if we've got some sort of an assumption made about what the values are going to be. Our overall rate, I'm sure you all have it memorized and it's repeated to you constantly, is 67.25 cents. And probably our taxpayers are really interested in their total tax rate, what they're paying. And we've done a pretty good job, I think, as a city all the way going back to fiscal year 2017, and a lot of cuts to that rate. Back then it was in the mid-80s. All the way back in 2017, when I first started as a budget analyst and started seeing the rate come down. Those two things probably are a coincidence. But also important within the rate overall for our city planning, and even things that we have to disclose as well under truth and taxation, is how the rate is broken up. So it depends on if you're looking at no new revenue rate or voter approval rate, how these things are prescribed, but we get some allowance on at least the voter approval rate for the debt rate, which is right now at 14.75%. And then we've got the O&M rate, which funds the general fund, further broken down into what's our typical operations and what funds our pay-as-you-go capital. We call that our capital maintenance rate, which is set at 7 cents. So the no new revenue rate, this is really, above all, I would characterize this as a reporting requirement. And unlike the voter approval rate, this is not a binding rate in any kind of way. But the essence of this is that if you have similar properties between last year and this year, you need to report on the rate, the no new revenue rate, which raises the same amount of revenue only on those properties. And it's not a suggestion or a mandate, but it's really kind of a math-based illustration of what it would take to not make the typical taxpayer pay more. Now, about a decade ago, there was a series of videos, and you might have heard the phrase, "Honey Badger don't care." The no new revenue rate is a lot like that. If you've got a huge new capital program, no new revenue rate, don't care. If you've got no negotiations going on with staff, if you have more debt than you did previously, if you have a big change in the nature of your property tax base, the no new revenue rate doesn't make any distinctions for that. Whatever those property values were and how they increased, that defines your no new revenue rate, no matter what you have to spend the money on. So knowing that this will change, as David said, based on our estimates of erosion, what we're projecting, this is what you might see the no new revenue rate look like in July. So if you try to see this 123 billion again in the presentation, it might not show up, but this is only the growth in those existing properties that we had on the roll last year. So it's pretty straightforward. As those amounts go up by 6%, the no new revenue rate is going to be a 6% decrease proportionally from our current tax rate of 67.25. Just for a little bit more of a visual demonstration, you can see that as those properties go up, it really just pushes it down. It all hinges on whatever that levy was last year. That's going to remain constant, and the rest of it all circulates around that.
Brady, I don't know if this is a good time to bring this up, but I'm curious. I'm following along with these slides, and I'm trying to understand something. I don't want to make an assumption. What percent of the tax base for commercial versus residential, what assumptions are still valid? What are you assuming now? Because when I last heard, we were trying to achieve, we being the city, to adjust the commercial portion to 60% for the ratio. So where are we at? Has there been a change in the assumptions there?
You want to take that first, David?
Well, what we're using here is actual numbers that we've got from the appraisal districts. We haven't broken it down by residential or commercial. So one of the things we could bring back is what does that commercial residential mix look like by county and the composition of the new development? And what has happened over time, and again, we'll bring back some of these numbers, is residential is growing at a much faster rate than commercial, but it's in the existing values. It's not necessarily reflected in the new development, but it's more reflected in existing values. Residential increasing at a faster rate than commercial. But for this presentation, we didn't make a distinction between residential and commercial.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's well said, and I appreciate the question, council member, because it is a big focus on the nature of the city, and yeah, those properties, they all factor into this at the same rate. Now, when we start going into the increment, I know this is where I'm probably most at risk of losing you, so I'm going to make it as quick as I can. But another one of those truth in taxation rates is the voter approval rate. That is the no new revenue rate plus 3.5% growth for your maintenance and operations, and then whatever you need for debt. And by definition, the voter approval rate includes what we refer to as the unused increment for previous years. Where this comes from is that the state of Texas, even though they hold you to these certain rates, they'll reward you a little bit for the fact that maybe you've kept rates low over time, you haven't increased it by the max. So for at least up to 3 years, if you went below the voter approval rate, then you can carry some of that increment forward and apply it in the future to your voter approval rate. Now, if that wasn't enough for you, there's actually been a change in the way that that is applied. So whereas before you could take the whole pennies themselves, and that would have been almost 3.5 cents. Now they're kind of reconsidering this and they're saying that penny now, it's worth more in 2025 than it was worth in 2022. So you can only capture the revenue equivalent of that penny this year. So there is still some unused increment, and we'll come into that and how that affects the various voter approval rates. But since now all we can take is 31.5 million, those pennies are more like 2.5 than 3.5.
Let's test that. Let me say that again. So in the redefinition, and I think that came from the comptroller, right? Is that the comptroller?
Yes.
They said you can only go back and capture the revenue loss, not the equivalent in the tax rate. And so we've calculated now that that number would be equivalent to $31.5 million, which in today's terms, right, would be less if we applied the tax rate equivalent. And just for fun, I think Brady has this in the presentation too. Just for fun, we could say a penny in today's terms is 12 million bucks. So you kind of take the 31.5, divide by 12, and you get close to 2.5 cents. So it's 2.5 cents equivalent in today's dollars is what we're talking about.
So before we even look at revenue scenarios, we know, you can see the values went up. There's new construction. You can't have that happen and not have new revenue. But we want to bring top of mind some of the cost considerations that are going to weigh against some of that new revenue. So one of the biggest ones is 40.6 million of existing commitments, and that takes a lot of forms. Could be prior year commitments, our cost allocation increases, negotiations with some of our staff. And in a previous budget work session, I believe there was a breakdown of what all goes into that number. There's been many conversations so far on street maintenance, and we know there will be many more, but that's estimated at 66 million for next year. And then our EMS solution has a cost estimate of about 10.9 million. And you also heard within the past month an estimate on what it would take to give a property tax exemption to some of our child care providers in the city. And then this afternoon, you'll hear about if we were to do another increase on par with last year for over 65 and disabled residents, what that would cost. So there's a lot of things in play on what we would spend the money on. And this is some of the new revenue we might be looking at some of our different rates. So,
Brady, let me stop
Yes.
you right there for a
Sure.
moment. I'm not going to overly dwell on that number because I know these are preliminary, but for EMS, 10.9,
yes.
I was under the impression it was a little lower than that. Maybe 10 being the ceiling, but again, it's an estimate, I get it. It's nice to be conservative, so just want to double check.
Sure.
We'll present that today in the EMS presentation, but our number, the Fort Lab number is 10.887.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I'm not the expert on that, so I can't give any more commentary at all. I'll wait till this afternoon and I'll learn along with everybody else. But so far, everything that we're presenting right now, we've got 4 scenarios for you, pretty much the typical ones. These are all assuming that we keep our debt and our pay-go rates constant. Oh, sorry. So this means that all of that variability pretty much in these scenarios would be absorbed by our maintenance and operations rate in the general fund. As David mentioned, you can see within the numbers, the value of penny there, it depends on what happens with erosion, but it is going to be somewhere around 12 million on the high end, and then some of that is lost to things like tax ceilings and collection rates. But if I go from left to right and just walk through these a little bit, you start with the no new revenue rate. You can, under this scenario, we would only be getting any new revenue from construction. So it's no new revenue rate on existing properties, but we get a little bit of that from properties that came onto the roll. And most of that is eaten up by the increase in the debt rate. Well, not the increase in the debt rate, but holding debt constant. So as property values go up, if the rate is constant, that claims more revenue. And we have a little bit there at the bottom. That's net new to the general fund, 3.58. But just remember, this is before we take anything from the previous page into account. So next we're looking at the voter approval rate if you don't count that increment in there. So this is the 3% growth plus our debt. And that comes out to 66 cents pretty much exactly. And this gives us a lot more revenue to work with, but it's still below even that first number of 40.6 million.
Let me add to that real quick. So that is, if you remember when the state changed the law, they said you can have all new development and you can have 3.5% of existing growth. So that's what the equivalent of the voter-approved tax rate is, assuming no increment. New development, 3.5%, right? I want to emphasize that there's a key assumption here that we've made that still is a choice of the city council, and that is, what should the debt rate be? We kept that constant, right? So you could argue we could bring the debt rate down some percentage. We kept pay-as-you-go tax rate constant. So it's still at 7 cents. Debt service rate is still at 14.75, but those are policy choices that we can make also when we talk about the budget in July.
Thank you.
One quick question. Could you explain the math to me on the minus new debt revenue? Why the numbers are different and they're kind of not linear?
I can. I know that looks confusing. So the main reason for that is that as the rate goes up, the debt rate makes a smaller percentage of the overall rate. And then with all those other funny things that happen, mostly in this line, the amount that's lost to TIFs and frozen values, that's why you see small differences across there. I think if this was July 25th and then we were adopting, we would obviously standardize that across there and we make it pretty clear it's going to be constant what the debt rate gets. But it's a good question. So moving to the next column, so just as David said, this first one is using no increment at all, and it's not accruing any increment for future years either. But if we adopted this rate, that big amount from 2021, that falls off permanently, and now that's gone. So the next one is just a scenario in which we keep the rate flat. And now we're moving at least above where the 40.6 was of existing commitments. We have new revenue in the general fund of almost 47 million. And it takes some of that increment, about half the increment exactly, to keep the rate flat. And finally, just theoretically, if we were to use the full increment available to us under our estimate of erosion and go up to the max rate without having an election, we would be at 68.5 using 2.5 cents of increment, and then we would have $61 million new revenue in the general fund. So these are the same revenue amounts just in the previous slide, but now you can see how the rate breaks down. And once again, just note that the M&O rate in the general fund, like David pointed out, that's absorbing all the variability, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. If we think that a smaller amount of growth, which these amounts exceed, would be all right for the PAYGO rate and the INS rate, then the general fund might be able to come out better than these amounts.
Can I jump in with one question?
Yeah. Sure.
On the INS rate, how much of that rate is needed to fulfill our debt obligations? And I know we're preparing for the 2026 bond, so how much theoretically would we need?
So in all the presentations that we've shared with you, whether it was me or Reggie getting up here, In our modeling, we use 4% growth into the future, right? And so, based on those numbers, then we've been able to share with you that we could do 800 million in capacity for the upcoming bond. Does everybody remember that? Right, so that's based on a 4% growth rate in the short term, and it gets more conservative over time. But based on the numbers that we've seen, we're going to get more than 4%, right, if we go beyond the no new revenue part, right? So if we are comfortable with 800 million as the capacity, then we could stop the growth at 4%, right, in the upcoming budget conversation. Or if we decide that we want more budget capacity, then we might want to keep it at 14.75 cents in order to generate more capacity for the 2026 bond program. That's a policy choice there. But we're modeled at 4%.
Thank you. So taking these revenue numbers into account, we want to give you an idea of what it would look like now with some of those existing commitments built in. So on the far left, we've got a lot. If we were to really consider no new revenue rate situation, just funding the things that we know are firm commitments leaves us with a pretty big hole we would have to make up, whether that was really looking for any new funding streams or any other kind of situation to make that amount up in the budget. With the voter approval rate, obviously that's a tax rate increase. That leaves us with some left over, but the rate comes up in that case. And then if we look at what it would be keeping the rate flat, we're at least pretty close right there. In this model of 4.6 million, that would probably come from either new revenue streams or some really small spending cuts somewhere else. And I just want to bring it to your attention again, a reminder that this is a flat rate, but the state of Texas, based on the truth in taxation concepts and philosophies, that's considered a tax increase by the state. So what about, just to close it out, what about street maintenance, which we said was 66 million? So if you add this into these amounts and these scenarios, this is what it would look like. So in the highest possible case legally, going with the rate that we could adopt under the law, we would be looking for $56 million to try to fund that if it was only going to come out of the general fund. More realistically, more feasibly, the rates we would go with, we'd be considering somewhere between 71 million and 114 million that we'd have to make up if the general fund absorbed all the existing commitments and the EMS solution and street maintenance without any help on that from another source.
Sorry. The street maintenance question, that $66 million, and I should know this, and I just don't remember from the previous presentation, is that what we need? That's not what we need annually to, so we need, I'm getting a yes. So we need $66 million annually from starting today until when? Forever to keep up with street maintenance?
I'm watching
I know,
Lauren nod yes.
I'm seeing
Yeah.
head nods. So it is $66 million annually?
More. Yeah.
Yes. Every year?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. So the,
okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Can we further clarify? I had thought through our discussion that we wouldn't be able to scale up the capacity to actually leverage that money for the first several years.
I think that
Would
is
Would
accurate.
it be necessary to do the full 66 million in year one?
Let Lauren go to the microphone.
So yes, we are working on a plan for kind of a 5-year scale up. I don't have that number that we would need for the first year. I would imagine it'd be around 10 to 20 million at a minimum, but we'll have that for this afternoon.
I have a question, and it's just a general question stemming from Carlos's observations about what he thought were the dollars for MedStar or EMS. Carlos left a meeting with $1 figure in mind. Your presentation shows a different dollar figure with the explanation. We'll get truing up, I guess, in the afternoon. Are there any other areas that staff has taken this, for lack of a better term, liberty, so that we'll know just how closely we have to look? Because had he not mentioned that, I wouldn't have known. In other words, I don't want to just get real.
Well, I think for the, this afternoon, you'll get a much more detailed explanation of the number. All we're trying to do today is put some numbers out there that we think are consistent with what you're going to hear this afternoon.
And
There's some, let me do one other piece.
okay.
These numbers here don't even include what departments are going to request in the upcoming budget. So these prior year commitments are just the things we know of. It's the meet and confer agreement, it's the collective bargaining agreement, it's opening a new library, it's opening a community center. So these are the things, this doesn't even include what departments may ask for in the upcoming budget. So we're not trying to get too hard pressed
Detail,
on the
okay.
exact numbers as opposed to simply sharing a magnitude of a situation.
I can accept that.
Yeah.
I do have another question. And David, you know, for years, you and I have had this running joke where I tell you you've threatened the life of a department head's firstborn rather than have them tell us what they really need. What I would,
No, we've told them this year to go ahead and ask for everything.
well, and that's my hope, that we can see the department head's budget before it gets filtered. And that way, they truly have to make the case, you know, for what they're looking for. So thank you for that.
May I ask on this, it's fine to use this slide as the scenario, but David or Brady, walk us through how, if we decided to arrive at any of these four options that are before us, how that would get communicated to the average resident here in Fort Worth? And importantly, what their tax rate or tax bill would look like, if that makes sense. Without, I know there's a lot of assumptions, and I'm not going to hold you to numbers, but.
If I, in answering that, if I could do one other thing, because I want to, here, since we're talking about assessed value and tax rates, we're only talking about property tax revenue. When we bring the budget to you, we will be looking at all revenue sources, which includes sales tax, what's happening with fee revenue and otherwise. So not everything is balanced off of property tax rate revenue. It is a big number. It's what, almost 56% of the general fund. It's a big number, but it's not the entire number. So we're not trying to necessarily balance the budget here. We're trying to share with you what revenue growth looks like relative to needs. That's all.
Thank you.
When we bring the budget to you in August, and what we try to communicate with the public based on their tax rate is what is happening to their assessed value, what is happening to the tax rate. Their values are going up on average of, you saw the number, 9%, right? And if we keep the tax rate the same, their tax bill's going up 9%, right, on average. The key is, what is in the budget that we want people to see value in? So we've got to translate value to what people pay. And over the, like last year, it was clean, so safe, so green. Do people see it? Do they see the value of what we're spending tax dollars on and what they pay in property tax revenue? Sometimes you don't get the connection, but I think that communication starts when we present the budget, because some people's taxes, I think, will be going up. Do they see the value in what we are spending the money on? I don't know if that's, but we weren't trying to show those relative trade-offs today because we don't know what will be coming on the spending side of the budget other than those things we know about.
I appreciate all of that, and just one particular part of your question, Mayor Parker, is how it's communicated. And a lot of that is lined out just as specifically by Truth and Taxation as calculating these rates are. So it'll be in the newspaper, there will be hearings, it's really specifically prescribed how it's communicated to the residents. So that brings us about to the end of the analysis on what the rate could be, and if this has to do with future policy questions, maybe David, you want to talk about this before I do?
Oh, sure. Again, the purpose of today was to get us started having the conversation about the property tax rate. To me, there's three components of that. One is the overall tax rate and making sure everybody understands what the no new revenue means, what the voter approved means, and for you to know that we have the ability in the budget to use increment up to 2.5 cents, right? Those are all policy choices. Then within the tax rate, how much of that do we want to dedicate to debt, right? We've made an assumption here that we would keep it flat, but that could change as we, again, evolve with the budget. And how much do we want to attribute to pay-as-you-go? That is currently fixed at 7 cents in all these assumptions. We will work with all the appraisal districts between now and July just to get a gauge on what is happening related to protests and adjustments. Right? We'll get some signals from the appraisal districts to know whether the assumption we made here that the 7-year average is going to hold, or they could be worse or better, right? So what we're looking for is some indication to give us an idea of what the assessed value number will look like in July. And then July comes, July 25th, I think was the date. And then we'll get a number from all the appraisal districts that will, is what we then do all the calculations on Truth and Taxation based on that July 25th number. So we will know the actual no new revenue rate at that point. We'll know the voter approved rate. And so that will be used on the revenue side of deciding what the upcoming budget looks like. We plan to use future budget work sessions to talk about the capital side, right? Both from a pay-as-you-go standpoint to look at what options might be there and what options might be on the debt side as well based on what we model and what the actual numbers we think will look like.
I've got a question, and this is just tagging on to the mayor's concern. You know, and I looked for Renee, so I know he's here. I really do want to know how we're going to communicate to John Q. Public. And my concern is, I've stated before, you know, very few people can afford a subscription to the Star Telegram. We no longer use that full-page city page. The county got that, and I think even that's gone. With the So Clean, So Green, you know, that deal was great, but that was an internal rallying cry. I think you get better buy-in from the public if the public is engaged. And so I'd like to know, I want to hear some ideas of what we're going to do different so that people do understand why they need to give input, what we're proposing, and how they can impact. People are very, very pleased to see us coming out early this year, and I hope we do that every year. So that's enough tap dancing to give some kind of idea as to how we are going to communicate this to John Q. Public.
This is a subject we've talked about this, Councilmember Bivens, that I'm passionate about. And in just a few minutes, since we're not delving as deeply into PAYGO as we thought we would today, we need a little more time to model scenarios. What we're going to do next is preview some of the engagement tools that are rolling out at the open houses so that you can see the different ways we're trying to engage that are different than before through like thought exchange and through some balancing act tools. So I'm going to ask the labs engagement team to do that in just a few minutes. So that'll hit a little bit on what you're asking for.
Macy?
Okay. David, this was actually very helpful, I thought. I think moving forward too, if we can have another session like this that models, including the sales tax and the
Agreed,
fee,
yeah.
think that would be very helpful just to see. And then what the scaled street maintenance amount would be, starting year 1 to year 5. I think that would give us a better picture of what we're dealing with. And then talking about the value add for the taxpayer, I think we can all agree that that's the potholes. Those are the essential services, the trash pickup. Those are the value adds that that normal taxpayer sees that doesn't understand all this. And whatever we can do to make it less complicated for them, to Gina's point, that's what we need. What are we doing differently to make sure their lives are better and the quality of life is improved?
Well said.
The other thing that, I don't know, I think this is possible, but I'll throw this idea out there. If we're seeing property tax, appraisals increase across the board in the city of Fort Worth, or if we're seeing them in specific districts or regions of the city, and you could do a heat map to kind of demonstrate that, because I think it also helps, back to your point about communication, are what we're telling people, is the information we're telling people in District 3 the same as in District 10, as in District 2, just based on averages, right? And I realize that not everyone that's going to apply to, but I think that's helpful, especially each individual council member. And then to Macy's point, and maybe this works to do this in June based on timing, but to come back and look at all the funds and all these scenarios. And because on slide, whatever this is, with the 60 million included, or 66 million, that's really not accurate. I mean, it sounds like we're not going to use $66 million in year 1. So if it's 10 or 15 based on Lauren's team coming back to us, I think that's important. And then the last thing is, when you're looking, we get out communicated because all people are reading is their property tax bill from the tax assessor, right? And it's either it's up or it's down, and that's all they seem to care about. Yeah, right, never down. And so what additional information do we need to put in people's mailboxes, or how we're communicating ahead of that is going to be increasingly more important to people, especially right now when there's a sort of heightened awareness around the economy, and will continue to be so. The last point is, and this was, to Macy's point, incredibly helpful, is it may be necessary, I don't know, when do you finish decision packages and budget process for department heads this year?
Budget submissions are due on Friday,
Okay.
this Friday. And then we'll do budget blitz in mid-June. And so really all sort of wrapped by June 21st, and then we start, moving puzzle pieces around.
So based on today's conversation, it came up again from Gina, but I think especially at the end of last budget, to the extent it's workable to bring some of those high-level decision packages to the council in late June, allowing us to just see what y'all are grappling with. You're not done with the decision process. You're just showing them, in parks or in TPW, these are the things that they're asking for, and this is how we weight those as CMO. And then this body will feel like they have more buy-in and understanding, so that when you come to us in August and you've made those decisions, they feel like they've been more a part of that process. And furthermore, in July, to the extent that they want to, they can work with CMO on the things that they feel very strongly about in certain departments, because everybody may have something that they need in their district. If that's workable based on that timeline, I don't know when our budget workshops are outlined for June. Charlie, did you have anything, or is this the dog's tails wagging? Just dogs. Okay, good deal. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
I'll just jump in. This is a really good discussion. The thing I would add in the mix is, especially when we're talking about the $66 million in additional funds needed for street maintenance, I think it's important, especially for me as a council member, to have a list of the projects already budgeted if we keep the status quo, and then what additional 10, 20 million we'll do in phase 1 of this 5-year ramp up. I don't have any concept of whether or not I can go back to District 6 and tell my residents there's value in that additional 10, 20, $60 million if there isn't a single project, especially if it's not a neighborhood street being maintained. And that's something that neighbors see and talk about a lot in District 6. The second thing I think that's important is if we can talk in terms of pennies of what we actually need in order to fulfill an $800 million bond, that could help us kind of compare across the different rates, how many pennies we actually have to work with to kind of achieve multiple goals and sometimes competing goals to make sure we're creating value and also giving residents you know, some breathing room in a really tight economy.
Jared, I'll add to that. I had to live that in real time, but in the 2014 bond election, D5 did exceptionally well. We had 2 rec centers in one bond package, same district, never seen that before. 2018 came out, it was like, but I had to remind people of the streets and the projects that came through in 2014 because they only think in real time. And so I encourage, I think it was Venables then, to make sure to bring some type of history, you know, to a presentation as opposed to what we're looking at now. And if people can look at previous wins, you know, they are more accepting and understandable.
We should definitely add that to the mix. That way
Yeah.
we can create the value over time for us.
Any other questions? No, great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Amethyst Sloan and her team to come up to the podium while we switch gears here to engagement. It'll just take us a few minutes, and so we get to see some of the members of the Lab Strategy and Performance team today.
I'm gonna have you guys will drive over there. And Isaac or Brian, I'm gonna have you drive the map portion since I'll be standing over here too. We get everything pulled up. So Mayor and Council, nice to see you. Amethyst Sloan, Strategy and Performance Manager, Fort Worth Lab. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Brian Bellamy, Strategy and Performance Analyst, and Isaac Robles, also Strategy and Performance Analyst. We're gonna walk you through some of the engagement tools that we're launching this year. But first I wanna talk about, a lot of what we're gonna show you are part of some of the things that CPE, so Renee and Michelle and their team are launching. And then in the lab, both the engagement processes for budget and the comprehensive plan, we're really starting to, we have opportunities to use those really early on, so we're trying to capitalize on that and do as best we can. So David spoke a minute ago about like our organization, our ability to translate value to what people are paying. So a lot of things, so the first open house was last night, so big shout, Michelle's here, so big shout out to Michelle. They had really good, there were a lot of people there. Isaac and I were there last year. We'll be there last night. We'll be there at the following ones too. And we got to hear a lot of commentary about what we were doing with the budget and kind of our first initial pilot with some of these tools, really positive feedback. Things to the tune of, we're really excited to see a more modern approach to engagement. We're really happy that you're starting earlier in the process or questions. This is earlier, isn't it? So people are acknowledging and what we're trying to do is being felt by residents even this early in the process, which is really exciting. A couple of other things that you're gonna see, we're gonna show you and actually have you QR code, and everybody in the room can participate, anybody that's here. So you can walk through those tools and get a feel for what your constituents are being asked to participate in. And so you can answer those questions when you get them too. So again, that was Isaac and I at last night's open house. Again, kudos to Michelle for a really well set up and attended open house. Okay, next. So don't scan this one. I'll have you do this one at the end.
Okay.
But if you can click that link, this brings you to our new one-stop shop for engagement. So the comp plan team is using this portal. We're using this for budget and moving forward from everything. And Renee, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, from capital projects to other engagement opportunities that we have. There will be this one-stop shop where if you're a resident, you can go to this homepage and you'll see everything that we're asking for feedback on. This is our project page for budget engagement. And on this single page will be every way that you can engage for this particular project. So for us, we're gonna walk you through, we are doing a balancing act about council priorities. We're doing thought exchange about what do you need specifically in the budget. There's a mapping tool that will show you that's kind of down here at the bottom in a minute. And then of course, a link back to where our open houses are, when they are, et cetera. So we're gonna start at the bottom. I'm not gonna ask you to do this one because you don't have any pictures to submit. But if you can click, this is the mapping tool, so steer the budget. So you're all familiar with the Molly campaign that CPE launched a few years ago. Residents really love that. And what we're doing this year is translating that into this new mapping tool that's a part of the portal. So you can print out Molly, you can wander around town. When you enter this tool, if you go to the little plus button, it'll give you a pin. So you have two options, something that you love about Fort Worth. So perhaps like, I really love the way this community center is set up. I would love to see more of that in neighborhood X, Y, and Z. or need. This intersection needs to be repaired, there's no sidewalk here, et cetera. So over the course of this phase 1 of engagement, which is the budget development cycle, we'll have hopefully this map of all of these things that we will also have location pins for photographs and comments from residents on. So that's just one way we'll be able to show you kind of spatially what people are loving and want more of and are needing in the future. So that's tool number 1. Next, we are going to go to, and this one you can participate in. We are going to go to thought exchange. So anybody in the room, snap that with your phone. We encourage staff to participate as well. And Isaac, if you could bring that up too. And Isaac is going to walk you through step by step what that looks like, what folks are asked, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about why we're asking what we're asking too.
Yeah.
Do you know how to get the other screen up on here too?
Yeah, it's,
You're good? Okay.
once everybody has the opportunity to scan this, I'll
Perfect.
move over.
Can you get closer to the mic?
What was that?
Mike, use the mic.
Yeah, once everybody has the opportunity to scan the QR code, I'll walk you through the exercise together.
Everybody get there? Anybody having trouble?
I'm here.
We'll give you another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
I can do the presentation now.
Awesome.
All right, so thought exchange. So we got to roll this out last night at the public open house here. So I'm going to walk you through it all, and we'll go through it together. So here it is, and we do have an opportunity here to change to different languages using Google Translation. So residents have an opportunity if they need to change their language here. So go ahead and push the Get Started button. This is how it's going to work. There'll be an introduction slide, some basic demographic slides, which are optional for residents to answer. You'll share your thoughts. So there's an opportunity. We'll ask you a question about the FY25 budget. You'll share your thoughts. And then for the residents, there's an opportunity to rate other people's thoughts and concerns that they put in there. It's a completely anonymous, so no one knows what you put in there. I am going to ask the council to not rate people's thoughts, but I do want you to take part of putting in your thoughts and concerns here. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide here. So this is your introduction, so pretty much quick tips there that I just went over. We are asking residents to put as many thoughts and concerns as they want to put in for the FY25 budget. Rate other people's thoughts. It will stay open throughout the whole budget process, so all these open houses, so it doesn't close. So you have the opportunity, if you thought of something in a few weeks after the meeting, you can always go back there, put that thought or concern in there, and also rank others after some other budget or public open houses as well. So privacy, go ahead and accept it.
Please.
So we're gonna move right
My zip code
into,
is not in here.
what was
My
that?
zip code is not in here.
Okay, we'll double
Noted.
check.
We will check our list. Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll go through the first couple questions here. There is a prefer not to answer, but as we'll answer these, I am a resident. Select your age.
Just as a comment, as Isaac is going through these, asking demographic questions is something you're going to see more of from us. We're having an internal conversation. We actually have kind of a small working group going to talk about what are the priority questions we need to start asking so that, most critically, we can start providing you with better information about portions of the population that we are reaching or not reaching with our engagement. It'll also help us cater or be more specific about areas that we're not reaching, demographics that we're not reaching. So if you remember back to the community survey, the results we got back about 2 months ago, one of the biggest observation in that survey is our largest gap in satisfaction is between age groups. So we think that's something that we want to keep tabs on when we're engaging in the future, because that's where we see about a 20 to 25% point gap in satisfaction between those that are older and those that are younger. There will always be an option to not respond, but we want to provide that opportunity. It just allows us to us to be a lot more data-driven moving forward.
All right, after you answer all your demographic questions, you'll come across a screen called Share Your Thoughts. So you can enter as many concerns, thoughts you want, and then the next box underneath there is why is it important to you. So if you want to go ahead, I'll give you about 30 seconds. You can put in 1 or 2 of them, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So I'll put in, if I can spell today.
Amethyst, while people are putting in their thoughts, I've done mine. I will be concerned about the non-tech savvy
Yes.
and the disabled.
Yes. So a couple of things. So at last night's meeting, I was actually there were two folks there that couldn't see very well or read, and we actually walked through with them, got an agreement for them to say, are you okay if I enter that information for you because we really want it? Now, I recognize that we won't be able to do that for everyone, but I think that's the importance about it. This is one of about 4 or 5 different tools that we have, including some that are being translated to a physical opportunity at the open houses that Michelle and her team are facilitating. So with these digital tools, we're not trying to replace, but to add to the opportunities. I think the digital are always going to be an and, not an or.
So once you put your thoughts in, you can push submit your thought. You have an opportunity to share more if you want to, or you can start rating. Don't rate today. We'll leave that up to the residents to rate everybody's thoughts here. But I'm gonna push start rating to go through the next step here. So this is kind of what the rating looks like. So you're able to give 1 star if you strongly disagree of the comments or thoughts from the other residents, or you can strongly agree from there. So for just to move on from here, I'll give this one.
And to give you some data on, we've done a couple of these now, and with a few of them that apparently residents have found more interesting, we do have some numbers that indicate folks are rating like 50 to 70 comments. So once they're in it, it's pretty quick to do. And I think you'd be amazed at how much the average person gets through in about 3 or 4 minutes. So we're hoping to see that at the end of the process, this process as well.
Amethyst, if I was not in this presentation and going through the app, and there's all these misspellings and the comments are not always proper English, that reflects on the city, because I don't think people may not understand that these are actual comments that people have written in. Is there a way we can make that more clear, or?
We can try to do that. We also, thank you for bringing that up. We also have the ability to flag comments, take them down, or comment on comments. So for example, if someone says something that is massively erroneous, we can correct it and say, here's what that actually means, or what is actually happening. So we're monitoring kind of daily on the back end to make sure we're catching things like that too. But we'll look for opportunities to make sure that folks understand that this is like a crowdsourced information from the public and not from the organization. Good feedback.
So through collecting the data and reporting it back out, Thought Exchange gives us a few options and opportunities to look at what people put in here. So this is a new one. It kind of gives you some like kind of like a cloud, word cloud, so you can see what words have been in there as that listed as much or typed in. So we'll finish there. So that's the whole Thought Exchange. So I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint to give you some other opportunities to see how we can report this out to the public and then report internally to you and to our department as well. Oh, that's not the right PowerPoint. So here are the other things that we can provide to you, and we can see how many people engaged using Thought Exchange, overarching themes and highlights. So taking all those thoughts, Thought Exchange will be able to summarize it. We'll be able to see top priorities, areas of greatest and least agreement by, zip code, key demographics, and we can also play around with how we report it out infographic-wise. So this is just an example from last night here. So we were able to see where people rated the comments from last night's open house. So that was a quick one that we put together this morning to show y'all. So as we get more and more comments, thoughts, concerns using Thought Exchange, we'll be able to report it back out to y'all and increase our public engagement.
And the reason we're asking for zip code is we toyed around with council districts last year, but the average person may or may not know what their council district is. And when we can map zip codes by council district, it's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And since we're talking about kind of qualitative moving to quantitative here, we'll be able to give you, we intend to give you at least 2 snapshots through this process of information by district to help you make your decisions and thoughts as you move forward with the budget process. Okay, the second, next tool, that's Thought Exchange. And the second digital tool is called Balancing Act.
So Balancing Act, I'll give you a few minutes to scan that QR code as well. It takes you to an app, and way we have it set up here is for council priorities, to give residents an opportunity to rate, to select 3 of the 5 council priorities and then rate those, prioritize them based off of what's most important to them.
2 websites that they have to access to fully participate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
So the first page that it takes you to is an explanation and a welcome about what you're getting into and what we're asking you to do. You can go ahead and click continue on that. That site also gives you a link to the open house locations and the calendar for all of the open houses that are occurring this month. Then it takes you to our demographic questions. Now, these are purely optional, just like in Thought Exchange. You can either go through and answer each individual question, or you can just click continue and skip them all, since they're optional. And that will take you to the main page that lists all of the council priorities. We've included explanations about what the council priorities include, as well as if you scan down just a little bit to community safety, there's a longer explanation about what CCPD is as a funding source for folks like me who see it on the back of police vehicles but don't really know what that was. So that's to help our residents understand what those are. Balancing Act is really cool. It will randomly put these in an order. So that your page is going to look different than somebody else's page, some other resident's page. So that is to help prevent skewing of results on this. So we'll go ahead and we'll just select the first 3 up there. And perfect. If you'll scan down to the bottom of the page, you'll have an opportunity to rank these in order. Now, we chose responsible growth, economic development, and community safety. But let's say I think community safety is really more important than responsible growth. So we can just click on that and move it up. And if we're happy with the rankings, we can click submit. And if you are somebody who constantly second guesses your choices like I do, you have a second opportunity to rate your or prioritize those. So we'll move economic development back up to the top there and click on I'm Not a Robot. And that will allow us to submit this. You're very good. I'm glad you're not a robot.
Can you get this right under pressure, I think? Yeah, close. A couple of comments about Balancing Act while Isaac's submitting that is, so we see this as an opportunity to get your priorities out and sub-goals out in front of the public. So you'll see a resolution coming forward to officially adopt those, as we talked about in February shortly. But a couple of ways that we approach that were a little bit different. We actually put everything through a word filter to make sure we were using wording that could be read by an 8th grade level, so make sure that we know we're not using complicated words. We went through and had a couple of folks test it for us and notice things that we forget, like CCPD. We know what it stands for, but maybe not everyone does. So we're hoping that this is our take at giving you high-level information about generally what people feel about your priorities, and then we'll also have the specific budget items, like I want to fix X, Y, or Z. So we're trying to capture both ends of that spectrum and also appeal to folks that maybe want to get into the details or don't want to get into the details, but they're still going to give you information that you can use to help make those decisions.
Excellent. And just like Thought Exchange, Balancing Act includes a whole lot of analytical tools that you can use. It has everything from submission rates, which is highly skewed right now because I've been in there testing it constantly, so it's a little lower than what we hope it will be. And you can prioritize things by zip code as well as you can in Thought Exchange, as well as key demographic data. So we'll be hopefully presenting that to you all again soon.
Wonderful. Okay, so to close, again, these are just a sampling of what we're doing here in the lab on the digital engagement side. There's a lot of other things going on at the open houses. Again, Michelle has some great activities that are more tactile that you can do during those meetings. And we are in the process of filming some instructional videos in English and Spanish that show you how to use each of these tools as well. Some of them are, to us, they're pretty easy, but they may not be to everyone. And we're looking forward to feedback. Again, part of this is just testing out some new things that are available to us so that we can work with Renee's team in deciding, okay, like what really speaks to our residents or what kind of engagement, so that we can start using more similar tools more often so the average person knows what it looks like and feels like to engage with the organization. Any questions for us?
More just comments. I think this is really great. Well, there's one question. How long will these sites be up?
So during phase 1 of engagement, this will be up from now until the beginning of August. And our intention here is to leave this open a very long time, again, give you some snapshots of results by district throughout that process. And then we are going to be thinking about what to do for phase 2. So once the recommended budget comes out in that last month between the recommended budget and adoption, we'll be doing something smaller about, specifically about the adopted budget. So this will be available until August.
Awesome. And just, it could be user error, but I couldn't submit the CAPTCHA. So like the second
Noted.
balancing act.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's like a glitch there.
We'll check it out.
Thank you. Thank y'all for all of the great work on this. I see the benefit of having digital tools like this. And also, I think having two can be a bit confusing. And the balancing act, I'm not quite sure I'm not quite sure why we need it, because the priorities have already been set based on the feedback that we've heard from the community. And limiting them to only pick 3 of all of our priorities, which we said are priorities, is misleading to the public. And it also, I think, is probably not the best selection. It probably would be better if we were going to do that, for them to rank prioritize all 5 versus limiting it to 3. But I still think it's misleading. The second thing that I think would be additive to this is on the Thought Exchange. I think it'd be great to do digital advertising with that in a number of ways, so that folks can find the link without necessarily having to fumble through our website or go to an open house to do it. And we'd probably get increased amount of participation here.
Absolutely. And there'll be a lot of social media push for this in the coming weeks as well.
Also, you might want to try, I don't know if there's budget for it, but paid advertising, organic works as well as your algorithm works, in terms of if you're actually going to click on the City of Fort Worth page. If you're not going to see it, so.
Done. Renee says done.
So I have a different take on the ranking of the priorities. I think forcing people to say 1, 2, or 3 helps them really prioritize what they're looking for, and then it helps us know what they're looking for. And so, I think we've all taken surveys, and it's like, how important is, these 5 things to you? And they're all important, right? But if you had to rank them in importance, I think that helps us shape the budget too. So I like the idea of making them pick, because in doing so, it is their value. They're placing value on whatever that particular topic is. I'm not saying it can't be improved, but I like the idea of just making them pick, because it's less in the wind.
If you don't mind building, I agree with that. I think something that might be helpful is in the framing of the survey, maybe asking them what's most important in this current budget. And I didn't see it when I was doing it on the phone, but if I'm ranking it as a value, just as a value set versus as a priority in this upcoming budget, the respondent will give 2 different answers for that.
Okay. No, good feedback. We can definitely do that.
I just wanted to give you all a compliment. I went to the open house last night, and I thought it was very well done, very well organized, and very well attended. So
That's all Michelle Goot.
good job, Michelle.
Out here. We just showed up to participate. So big thanks to CPE for organizing that.
It was very well done.
Wonderful. One small comment before I leave. A note on the Balancing Act tool. So that tool has a number, this is one module of that tool, is a prioritization. So you can do that from everything from I don't know, what color community center do you like, or we're using it for priorities. It also has a simulation tool. So it's much more complex. It's a budget simulation tool where you can have people play with everything with types of revenue up or down, what you want to spend on. You can do it by priority. You can do it by, it has a lot of options. So we're looking into feasibility or how we might be able to deploy that moving forward. So future for the public, if we get to a place where we're comfortable, and I think Mayor Parker, last time we had a budget session, you mentioned wanting more input on some of the more specific decisions that you're going to be tasked with making as we get closer to that process. So there may be opportunities to do that there. There may also be opportunities to create simulations for you as you're trying to look at how pulling specific levers may adjust the overall budget. So we're just starting to look at whether or not that can be done, how we can do it. We did it once with I want to say dummy version, for lack of a better term, with the public in 2019, just to teach them about the budget and get them to sit at tables and make decisions together, it went really well. So I'm hoping we have opportunities to use it in the future. So we have a long way to go there, but we're looking into it as we move forward.
On balancing act, is there an addition that you can add into that app that would allow you to just give a comment at the end?
Yes.
I mean, I like the ranking. I think it's a simple way to introduce it to see if it works, but I just wonder if, for those that don't want to toggle between both of them, I liked it better than the thought exchange, just me personally. If at the end, as you're submitting your like general comments about the budget or complaints about the city, take them there and you can add them in however you want to, if it's possible, based on what
Yes.
we have right now.
Absolutely, we can add that functionality in. And we do still have the, you can submit input for the budget on the My Fort Worth app as well. So that is another opportunity, and we'll be listing that on that website as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'll wrap us up here. As I mentioned earlier in response to a question, department budget submissions are due on Friday. So we have been meeting with you very early before we even have those and trying to give you some helpful context and topics, but we'll have more meat after this Friday, and we'll continue to work with departments. And that will inform our upcoming schedule. So our next work sessions are scheduled for June 4th and then tentatively for June 18th. And we hope to bring you both some capital modeling, as we mentioned, and also some of those high-level department asks. And so what we see after Friday and into June will inform the upcoming schedule. I'll aim to get that to you beforehand as requested. So departmental budget previews, confirm the order later this month, and I will provide you details in advance. I know that you want that. Capital maintenance, and then I actually already had a note in here for additional FY25 revenue forecasting, so sales tax modeling, and any other big chunks of revenue that I think would be helpful. Surely property and sales tax are the biggest, but we'll look into what else could be helpful. Any other future agenda topics besides what we've talked about, or other feedback?
Could we get, as we're looking through the departmental budgets, could we get a snapshot of what's happened the last 5 years, and either that each department has increased this percentage or decreased this percentage, just to give it, I think that gives me a better idea of how much we've been spending in each department, how much that's increased. And
Where our
capture
investments have been.
2019, so we get COVID in there, and then pre and post COVID, if that makes sense.
5-year history per department. Got it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christiane.
Thank you.
So I think that's the last of our agenda items, correct? Because I don't have a list, but I'm going to assume so. Yes, okay. Any other questions or comments regarding the upcoming schedule for budget workshops? No? Okay, then meeting is adjourned. We'll be back in 30 minutes for exec.